Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Committee of Adjustments. This meeting to consider applications for minor variance and consent held under the authority of the Planning Act of Ontario. The role of the committee is to review the proposals that are before it, consider the evidence provided, and make a decision based on the four tests established by the Planning Act. In order to conduct an effective and efficient hearing, we have adopted the following process. Tonight's meeting will be live streamed and available for future viewing on the town's live stream page at oakville.ca/live. People attending this committee meeting are to be courteous and respectful of the members of the committee, town staff, and others in attendance. We ask that the cellular devices be maintained on silence or switched off at this time. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chair. All persons wishing to address the committee are required to provide their name and address. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided to all speakers. Any submissions beyond those 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the chair. Any material presented to the committee for viewing will remain the property of this committee. Persons seeking a deferral or withdrawal of an application will be invited to do so at the onset of the meeting, and if a request for a deferral is granted, it is the responsibility of the applicant to contact the Secretary-Treasurer regarding the scheduling of a new hearing date. At the request of the committee, the applicant may be asked to provide a brief presentation and answer questions that may arise. If the applicant has any concerns with the recommendations and proposed conditions found within the staff report, this is the time to advise the committee. All persons who wish to support or oppose the application will then be given an opportunity to speak to the committee. In the interest of efficiency, groups sharing the same view are asked to select a spokesperson, and individual speakers are asked to not cover the same points as those that have already been spoken. The applicant will then be given an opportunity to respond to comments made by interested parties and answer any additional questions for the committee. Discussion will then be closed and the matter will be taken into committee for a decision. Once the committee has made an oral decision, any person desiring a written copy must file with the Secretary-Treasurer a written request for notice of the decision. A green sheet is provided on the table at the back of the room for this purpose, and only those filing such a request will be given any subsequent notice of any appeal. Notice of the committee's decision will be mailed to the applicant and anyone who filed a written request no later than 10 days following the decision for minor variances and 15 days for consent applications. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, you may appeal the decision to the local planning appeal tribunal, and the last date to appeal will be noted on the decision. If no appeal is received within the prescribed time frame, the decision of the committee comes final and binding. The applicant and anyone who received a copy of the decision will then be notified by written correspondence. Thank you. So we have one regret this evening, Mr. Ian Flemington. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interests? I see none, thank you. I will now be taking requests for deferrals or withdrawals of applications. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of committee. My name is TJ Sakura. I am here on item number 6, CAVA 015-2020 at 150 Stewart Street, and I'm here to request that this application be deferred for further consultation with planning staff and possible revisions to the proposal.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Sakura. Who is here in attendance for application CAV 015 of 2020 at 150 Stewart Street? Okay, I see none. Members, all those in support of a deferral? Okay, your deferral has been granted. You will have to see the Secretary-Treasurer when your revised drawings and the fee has been received. She will notify you of the new date. We are no longer providing dates ahead of time.
That's fine. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of committee.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of committee. My name is Russ Cheeseman. I'm the solicitor for Sharif Sorial on item number 10 on the agenda this evening. I'm here this evening to request a deferral to another date, hopefully a soon date. We had a chance to review the planning staff report that we received on Friday. There's been a bit of a scramble. It seems that there may be another variance that got missed and needs to be added into the application. We're confirming that, and we want to make that revision and as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Cheeseman. Who is here for application CAV 019 of 2020 at 3358 Lakeshore Road, West? Okay, I see none. That's fine, Mr. Cheeseman. We understand that reviewing and working with town staff to address any outstanding variances. All those in support of a deferral? Okay,
Thank you.
you've been deferred. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman. My name is Ahmad. My company name 3906213 Canada Inc. The address is 579 Spears Road, and I request deferral, please.
You're here for which application?
The application for 579 Spears Road.
Oh, okay. So CAV 018 of 2020 at 579 Spears Road.
Yes,
Who is here for this application?
it's me, just me.
Okay, I just need to canvass the room to make sure that no one is in attendance waiting to hear for this application. I'm assuming that you would like to look at your application and review it.
No, I want to defer.
Yes, the reason for the deferral.
Yes,
Why do you want to defer it?
because we have a meeting today in the city at the planning department. They need some information, and we looking to receive those information from Conservation Authority.
Okay, very well. Members, are there any questions? All those in support of a deferral? Okay, your application has been deferred.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further requests for deferral or withdrawal of applications at this time? I see none. Very well. We'll proceed with the first item on our agenda, and it's CEV 010 of 2020 at 420 Drummond Road. Good evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is David Capper with Glenn Schnorr and Associates. And our mailing address is 10 Kingsbridge Garden Circle, Mississauga, Ontario, L5R 3K6.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Capper. Who is here for application 010 of 2020 at 420 Drummond Road? I see none. Okay, Mr. Capper, the floor is yours. This is for a new construction with a front yard variance. That's also supported by Conservation Halton, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair. In fact, a building permit has been submitted. The building permit has been reviewed by the town. It's also been reviewed by Conservation Halton, and they have, my client has received a Conservation Halton work permit for the proposed construction.
Very well. Do you want to do your presentation, or will you
I'm
already?
well prepared to. I'm happy to, should the committee wish to see it. I'm also happy to move forward if you'd like.
Very well. Are there any questions of Mr. Capper at this time or items of clarification? I see none. So, Mr. Capper, if you're satisfied, we are familiar with the application and we are ready to move on, and you're satisfied with the conditions that town staff have listed in their report?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very well. Who would like to start the ball rolling? Go ahead, Mr. Tulowski. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'll move this application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets the four tests of Planning Act and that the variance actually helps to regularize the streetscape, which is a positive thing. I'd note that there were no objections voiced from the committee. I'd make that approval subject to construction proceeding in general accordance with the site plan dated August 19, 2009, and elevations dated October 9, 2019, and that a building permit issues within 2 years.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Tulowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay. The application has been approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is application CAV 011 of 2020 at 1533 Warren Drive. Oh,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, my name
I
is
didn't
David.
look up.
My name is David Capper with Glenn Schnorr and Associates. Our mailing address is 10 Kingsbridge Garden Circle, Mississauga, Ontario, L5R 3K6. And we're here on behalf of the property owners at 1533 Warren Drive. Madam Chair, I have prepared a presentation for you this evening, and I would like to walk through it, if that's okay with the
absolutely.
committee.
This is your time to do so.
Sure. Madam Chair, you'll note that the subject property is highlighted in red at 1533 Warren Drive. If you've conducted a site visit, you will note that the property has its tree hoarding up, and it is preparing for for development of the resident. You will note perhaps that this application was before you on July 19th of last year. The application sought the approval of two variances. The first was for an increase in the residential floor area ratio, and the second was to recognize a reduced front yard setback. Through the building permit application for the previous approval, there were, and sorry, I should note that these variances were supported both by staff and approved by the committee in July. Building permits were applied for in November of 2019, and through the zoning review for those building permits, zoning staff identified an issue with respect to the covered porches. The covered porches, because they were covered, as well as a portion of it was not covered but had a below-grade basement, contributed to coverage, and that was missed in the last zoning review for the application. There were also architectural revisions that were made to the design following the approval by the committee, and staff have taken the position that those revisions were not in general accordance with the drawings that were approved by the committee. Given the extent of the revisions, it was our recommendation that a new variance application be sought, and that resulted in a number of new variances. The first variance, and I'll walk through this on the site plan, the first variance seeks an increase in the maximum driveway width. The increase is 28 centimeters, 0.28 meters, and it's at the widest point of the driveway, which is right in front of the garage doors. There is a second variance for an increase in the maximum dwelling depth, whereas the bylaw permits 20 meters as a maximum. The application seeks an increase of 0.74, 74 centimeters to 20.74. There is the variance for residential floor area, which seeks a slight increase to 31.37, which by way of reference is 1.94 square meter, a 1.94 square meter increase from the previous approval. Additionally, the application has added a pool cabana in the rear yard, and that has the function of increasing the lot coverage, whereas previously it would have complied. It is now over by 1.55%. And then the variance for the front yard setback is the same as what was approved previously. If I could just draw your attention to the blue arrow here, this is the part of the driveway that doesn't comply with the bylaw. So the additional 28 centimeters is being sought in this area here. And that's the maximum width of the driveway. I'm going to come back and talk about the driveway because you'll note that the staff has some concerns with respect to the circular driveway. With respect to the dwelling depth is measured from the front of the covered porch to the back of the rear covered porch. So it's actually not the full dwelling itself that's being measured, it's the full depth of the structure. So there's a little bit of an artificial inflation by virtue of this covered rear porch and the front porch. You'll note that there's slight changes to the elevations. Certainly there's a different roof line as well as a different building material. I'll come back to speak to this, but I'd like to make note of the 3-car garage doors at the front of the property. This is the rear of the property with the covered porch in this area over here. Forgive me, the computer has slowed down a little bit. This is the east elevation again with the rear covered porch. And the west elevation. And then finally, a site plan just superimposed over the air photo to give you a general sort of idea of what the site configuration is going to look like post-development. So this is, I say these next comments with absolute sensitivity because this is a situation where Staff support all the variances that are being requested. However, they've noted a concern with respect to the circular driveway. I can tell you that there is no part of the application with respect to the circular driveway that seeks relief from the zoning bylaw. The circular driveway is permitted as of right. It complies with the setback regulations. It complies with the width regulations that are identified in the zoning bylaw. And I have them here. I can flip to them at the end of the presentation. But there is no permission being sought for the circular driveway as part of this application. It is permitted as of right. Staff expresses the concern about how the circular driveway is out of character for the neighborhood. Certainly, if you've conducted a site visit, what you would have noticed is, and my reference earlier to the 3-car garages, large, wide driveways are a common characteristic in this area. So are 3-car garages, as well as circular driveways. So we did sort of a quick analysis of properties around the subject property that have circular driveways. And certainly there isn't any on Warren Drive, but what you will notice is that there are very large driveways, certainly much wider than the 5 meters that is proposed, cumulative width of the 2 driveway entrances that are proposed. So I respectfully ask that the committee not approve the condition that is suggested by staff, that the circular driveway not be included as part of the approval. From our client's perspective, they have young children. They are concerned with safety. An ideal situation is being able to leave the driveway in a forward motion, and that's part of the reason why they'd like a circular driveway. The other part is that if you visit the site, there's a large tree that's located at the southwest corner of the property. And when you're either leaving the driveway in a forward or backward motion, because of the curve of the road, that tree has a tendency to block your view down Warren. So our client has expressed concerns with respect to not only their safety, but of their kids as well, and their ability to leave the property without having any potential conflicts with cars within the right-of-way. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, should there be any.
Are there any questions of Mr. Capper or items of clarification? Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
This is either of Mr. Capper or of staff. I'm looking for a bit of clarification with respect to the measurement of the driveway width, the location being contained to that space that's immediately in front of the garage, as opposed to the cumulative width across the broadest part of the driveway or the paved surface.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could, somewhat a little bit difficult to do, I want to refer to 2 things at once. I do have the zoning bylaw on the camera. If I could ask for our colleagues in the IT department to flip.
Signal them, and I think as you
Yeah.
asked.
If they could do that now, that would be wonderful. Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Hardcastle, I asked that question myself. I certainly take a different view of how the zoning bylaw is interpreted with respect to the width. So it is section 5.8.5 of the zoning bylaw, which regulates circular driveways. It notes that there's a maximum coverage of 50% within the yard. We do comply with that. It notes that there's a maximum cumulative width of driveway entrances measured at the point of crossing the front lot line and flankage lot line shall be 9 meters. And in fact, just immediately to the right of the text, it shows a diagram which shows A and B, and it says A plus B equals maximum of 9 meters. So my review of this zoning bylaw says it's actually the 2 driveway entrances at the lot line that need to comply with the maximum width, which we do. And again, the variance is being sought for the portion of the driveway that is adjacent to the front of the garage doors. So with respect to all of the provisions in the zoning bylaw, we do comply. I think that's, ultimately, I think you can refer to staff, but that's the interpretation that I've been given.
Are there any further questions? Right, go ahead.
Madam Chair, through you, I would like to ask staff what their interpretation of the zoning bylaw is. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. In discussing this with our zoning staff, they were looking at the width of the driveway in terms of its location where the garage is. So on the other graphic that Mr. Capper had up that had the blue arrow, that was the measurement that they were looking at. If you look, I think that was where it had identified the width as being 9.28 meters. And that was the interpretation that we had received.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? So if that's staff's interpretation, so you do not, am I to assume that you do not agree with Mr. Capper's interpretation of what we're seeing of the bylaw right now?
Madam Chair, that wasn't a discussion that we'd had with zoning staff to understand the width of the entrances off of the road. We were simply looking at it where the entrance was at the garage door.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. While I give my committee members a moment, I may have neglected to ask whether anyone was in attendance for this application, so I'm going to canvass the room while they give a moment's thought. Who is here for application CAV 011 of 2020 at 1533 Warren Drive? Okay, I've seen none, so there's no one here. Thank you. Mr. Talowski, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Capper, reading the bylaw, I tend to agree with you that you've got a 9-meter driveway, not a 9.2 meter driveway. But regardless, the variance is on the table. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't believe you have a driveway variance to begin with, but even if you do have a driveway variance to begin with, the circular aspect of the driveway is not in question, but staff are asking you to remove something that is a permitted use and even has standards in the zoning bylaw. Is that correct?
Generally, yes. The only distinction that I would make is that I don't argue that there is a portion of the driveway that is greater than 9 meters by 0.28 of a meter. If the town, which they have, takes the position that that portion of the driveway requires a variance, then we have a variance that covers that. The disagreement is with respect to staff's position in recommending that the circular driveway not be approved. There is no component of this application that's before you this evening seeking approval of a variance for that circular driveway. It's permitted as of right, as I've mentioned. And my concern, obviously, other than the client's desire to have a circular driveway, is the zoning permissions allow this to happen. It's essentially, if you will, to sound somewhat stoic, it is taking away certain provisions that are afforded as of right in the zoning bylaw, unjustifiably. And I think that is not a very good thing to do.
Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Capper, in terms of the front yard variance, would you be kind enough to go through your thoughts with respect to official plan policies under 11.1.9 with respect to achieving some of the character requirements there and the purpose behind the front yard, and how the driveway, how in your opinion the driveway might impact the requirements of the official plan with respect to that section?
Sure. Perhaps it would be helpful if I was able to flip back to my presentation. And again, my apologies to our friends in the IT department, but if I could ask that. Perfect. So, Mr. Hardcastle, The zoning bylaw permits a circular driveway. So at some point in time, the town of Oakville, when they developed their zoning bylaw, they implemented a provision that allowed for this situation to occur. The zoning bylaw is intended to implement the official plan policies. This is permitted as of right. If the town takes the position that circular driveways are not a desirable aspect of development, then they should remove that from their zoning provisions. That's the position I take with respect to your question.
So the reduced front yard setback being proposed and the amount of area with respect to the character that's established within the area, you don't believe that the additional hard surface area has any impact on an assessment of front yard with respect to achieving character?
Through you, Madam Chair. The front yard setback is a function of the curve in the road. It's measured at its closest point right over here. So if this was a straight road without the curve in it, the likelihood is that there would be compliance with respect to the front yard setback. So in my mind, it's a technical variance that's required to recognize the curvature of the street, and it's certainly from a streetscape perspective, the proposed at 11.22 lines the. My apologies, I don't have a great air photo, perhaps other than the site context. It generally lines up the houses. This is a side yard function for this 196 Maple Grove. But there is a generally consistent streetscape and front yard setback as you move along the curve of the street. So I don't believe there's an impact on the front yard with respect to the reduced front yard setback on the basis that it is, in my mind, a technical variance.
Are there any further questions, Mr. Tlowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, there's a question for Mr. Charles. I'm struggling with the principle here in that staff are supporting variances that they meet all four tests of the Planning Act, provided you remove something that is not associated with the variances. So that tells me that staff feel that one of the variances at least doesn't meet all four tests of the Planning Act if it has a circular driveway, which is otherwise a permitted use. Are you able to help me with how the request by staff is directly attributable to the test of the Planning Act and the four variances that are in front of us? Or is it more of a preference not to have it?
Through you, Madam Chair. In looking at the overall site plan for the proposal, when staff looked at the neighborhood in the context, it was noted that there aren't any other circular driveways here. Does that maintain the overall character? In recognizing that versus the test in the Planning Act, I guess you could say it's more of a preference, and it's from the challenges that it could present in terms of grading or drainage, the removal of trees. The other objectives that the town has from an overall development perspective was taken into account, hence the recommendation that that it be just one leg of the driveway, we'll say, as opposed to having a full circular driveway on the property. That was how staff had reviewed it. If you want to call it a preference, I would say that there was more of a preference in the overall context and the development of the site.
Very well. Any further questions before we take the matter into committee? Okay, I see none. Mr. Capper, do you have anything further to add, sir?
Just one final point. Again, I say this with absolute sensitivity, knowing that we have staff support for the variances that are requested. And I think that first and foremost, that's a very important aspect of this application and staff's comments. But again, I respectfully submit to you that the preference is to preserve the circular driveway.
Understood. Okay, Who would like to get the ball rolling, and then we will have a discussion? Mr. Tulowski.
I'm sure we're going to have a discussion.
Sure.
Madam Chair, will come as no surprise, I'm sure. I'm going to move this application be approved as applied for, and find that it meets the four tests of the Planning Act. The variances have the support of staff. Note that there is no objection from the community. I would make that approval conditional on development proceeding in accordance with the drawings permitted or submitted, not subject to the removal of the circular driveway, and that the approval expire within 2 years if a building permit doesn't issue.
So we are taking, your recommendation is to take out the sentence following December 9th, 2019, where it says subject to removal.
Yeah, I guess it would actually be that dwelling be built in general accordance with the site plan. I've got a,
And elevations dated December 9th?
yeah, site plan and elevation dated December 9th, 2019, period.
Okay. Anything further? Okay. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't belabor the point. I think I've spoken. I believe that that the amount of hard surface area proposed within that front yard, with the reduced area and the alignment of the road is actually as a contributing factor to the ability for that front yard to provide a character that's consistent with that which is established elsewhere along Warren. I can't support the motion on the floor in terms of that one condition. I have no general concerns with the variances otherwise, but I'll not be supporting it based upon that one condition.
Yes, I was actually going to ask you to take the chair from me for a second because I'd like to put my 2 cents into this one.
Be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. So,
Mr. McHale.
thank you for recognizing. I understand Mr. Hardcastle's point. We've had these discussions often, but I tend to agree with Mr. Capper's explanation and rebuttal to the idea in terms of what the zoning bylaw allows and stipulates, and that yes, it is a preference from town staff not to have a circular driveway, but I'm convinced by the argument that Mr. Capper presented, as well as the nature of the neighborhood and the fact that this is a well-established neighborhood with fairly large driveways and mature tree lines. I think in the past we've had this discussion where a circular driveway is in front of a main street, and it more of a nuisance than anything else. But I think that in this scenario, it fits well within the streetscape, and there's no negative impact on the neighborhood. Those are my feelings as a humble member of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Tarowski, for taking the chair from me.
You're welcome. You can have it back.
Thank you. Okay, so now I will recognize that you would like to speak.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add to my earlier comments that I don't believe it's appropriate. The staff have not linked the requested amendment to the plan to the variances, and without there being a link to the variances being requested, I don't think it's appropriate for staff to ask for the removal of an otherwise permitted use.
Okay, that's fair enough. Ms. Murray, did you have anything to add, or we can move the motion? Okay, very well, thank you. So the motion that's before us is that the application be approved as submitted with the changes to the recommended conditions, that the dwelling be built in accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated December 9th, 2019, and our standard condition that approval expires in 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed. I've just read them again for a record, that now that we have had the discussion. All those in support of this recommendation? Okay. All those opposed? Okay. So it's a tie vote, which means that the motion has failed, and we'll have to take another motion. Who would like to move the motion? Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In accordance with the comments provided by staff, I would put forward a motion of approval subject to two conditions as worded by staff. The first being that the dwelling be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated December 9th, 2019, subject to the removal of the circular driveway to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services. And the second being that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued for the proposed construction. Correct, Madam Chair.
All right. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I guess everything that's been said. Okay, so we'll just take it to a vote then. All those in support of the application being approved with the conditions read on record by Mr. Hardcastle to leave the conditions as asked by staff? Okay. All those against or opposed? Mr. Talowski, and I have refrained from voting. Very well. So the application has been approved with the conditions as set forth, subject to the removal of the circular driveway.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Capper. All right, so the next item on our agenda is application CAV 011 of 2020 at 1386 Thornhill Drive. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of Committee Adjustment. My name is Raman Gide from Capcon Construction, agent for homeowner Gushan Day, property address 1386 Thornhill Drive. I have submitted variance application with Town of Oakville under Section 45, Paragraph 1 of the Planning Act to permit the covered porch additions to the existing dwelling. As per zoning by law, maximum lot coverage shall be 25%, that is 259.82 meters, whereas covered porch will result in total lot coverage by 27.23%, that is 283 meter.
Ms. Dev, I appreciate your full throttle ahead. I just need to just hold on 1 second. I need to canvass the room to make sure who is here in attendance for your application.
Sorry.
So application CAV 011 of 2020 at 1386 Thornhill Drive. Who is here in attendance for this
Madam Chair,
application? Sorry.
It's actually CAV
112
of 2020.
Oh, okay.
There's a
There's a
error on
typo?
the,
Yes.
yeah.
Sorry, I missed that. So application CAV 012 of 2020 at 1386 Thornhill Drive. Who's here for this application? Okay, I see none. You may proceed. We are aware of your application that is for a covered porch addition to an existing home. Go ahead.
Yeah. So also, as per circulated departments and agency comments, there is no negative impact of this variance. I would like to request, please grant additional 2.23%, that will be 23.18 meter lot coverage that will accommodate covered porch to existing dwelling.
Yes. Are there any, did you just add something to your variance?
Yes.
Okay, you can't do that, right?
It was
I thought I heard wrong. I did a double take for a second. So the variance that is before us is to permit the maximum lot coverage to be 27.23%, which means 283 meters squared, for the detached dwelling, which is greater than 7 meters in height.
Yes.
That is the variance that is before us.
Yes.
That is what we were asked to either approve or deny. Did you just add something to it?
So originally it is 25%, that is as per zoning law.
Yes?
But there is a covered porch already existing
Yes.
there. So which is greater than, so which is greater than 2.23%.
So you're just wording it. Okay, I misunderstood you. I'm sorry. I thought you were adding something new to your variance. You're just explaining it.
Yes.
Okay, very well. Yes, we're familiar with your application. We understand why you're requesting the lot coverage. Are there any questions of Ms. Dev, items of clarification at this time? I see none. If you're satisfied with the conditions that town staff have recommended,
Yes.
which is to accept your application in general accordance with the plans that you've submitted January the 4th
Yes.
of 2020 and our standard 2-year condition for building permits, then we can proceed and take this matter into committee for a vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, very well. Who'd like to move it? Sure. Ms. Murray, go ahead. Thank you.
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town staff's written report, which I note that the staff is in support of, having also taken into account that there are no written or oral objections from the audience, those present, nor do there seem to be any by email for this application. I'm satisfied that the minor variance application meets all 4 tests under the Planning Act, and I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the application for the variance, subject to the following condition: that the additions be permitted in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations drawings dated January 4th, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Very well, thank you. Very well, thank you, Ms. Murray. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Application CAV 013 of 2020 at 263 Gloucester Avenue.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here to represent our client, who is the owner of 263 Gloucester Avenue, and I'm from John Wilmot Architect, Inc., 594 Chartwell Road, L6J4A5 in Oakville, and my name is Emily Vea.
Good evening, Ms. Vea. Who is here for application CAV 013 of 2020 at 263 Gloucester Avenue? I see none. If I may ask, the gentleman and the lady who came in at the recently, what application are you here for? Next one. Okay, very well. We wanted to make sure that you didn't miss your application. The Secretary Treasurer noticed you coming in. Okay, Ms. Vega, the floor is yours. Your application at 263 Gloucester Avenue is for the second-story addition to the existing dwelling. The floor is yours. We are familiar with the application.
I do have one thing to add. This morning, our client has submitted a letter of support from a neighbor to the south of the property, and they have approached their neighbors to the north as well and across the street, and they have been given a verbal support, but no letter given. I do
Yes.
have one here, but
We do have it on record.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
for pointing it out.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions of Ms. Vega or items of clarification? I see none. If you're satisfied with the conditions in town staff's report, we are ready to take the matter into committee.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having undertaken my site visit and reviewed the materials, including the written staff report, I'm satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Act, and I'll put forward a motion of approval subject to 2 conditions. The first being that the addition be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated December 20th, 2019, and the second being that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit's not been issued. I would note that there was 1 letter of support submitted in support of the application, and no representations no verbal representations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay. The application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, application CAV 014 of 2020 at 311 Spruce Street.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Nick Jelinek, the property owner at Plan 127 Lot 10. And I live at the address 311 Spruce Street, Oakville, Ontario, L6J2G9.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Jelnick. Who is here for application CAV 014 of 2020 at 311 Spruce Street? Show of hands, please. Higher. Okay. Are you in opposition or in support? You're in support. And you're in opposition. Okay, very well. Mr. Jelnick, we'll have you go through your presentation for the benefit of the audience, and we'll take questions, and then we'll have the neighbors who are in opposition address the committee, and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
Thank you.
As a rookie, perhaps you can coach me along. Would you like me to use the laptop and the mouse?
This is your time, so however you want to.
Sure.
We are familiar with your application. We understand it. We have certainly done our site visits, and we're aware of what your request is, which is for the two-story dwelling that you're constructing. The reason we asked you to do the presentation is for the benefit of the audience, and then that gives us the ability to ask questions and get items of clarification done in a public forum, and then we take the matter into committee.
Okay.
But we know that your variance is an application for a lot coverage variance on the development.
That's right. Yes, thank you. So there's the one request, which is exactly for that, to move from the 19% to the 24.7%. The rationale behind the request is that the design of the house was conducted in such a way to fit within the neighborhood. In fact, it's the exact design of 4 other houses within the neighborhood. The massing of the house within that design was done in such a way so that it would not be offensive from the street. And there was a request by staff to flip the garage from the east side to the west side, which we've agreed to do in an effort to try to save as many trees as we can. And I'm open to questions, of course.
Sorry?
And I'm open to questions, of course.
Very well. Good, thank you. Are there any items of clarifications or questions of Mr. Janik at this time? I see none. Okay, I'll invite you to sit down, and we'll hear from your neighbors in opposition.
Thank you.
And at this point, I'd ask you to take notes, because you will be the one answering all their concerns. Thank you. Yes, ma'am? Are you both speaking, or you're just representing yourself and the gentleman?
This is my wife, so she's on my side, I guess.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I wasn't addressing you, I was addressing the gentleman in the back, because he had his hand up as well. So is he speaking as well, or you're speaking on your behalf?
My husband?
Yes.
No, we both live in the same house.
Very well, thank you, I just needed to clarify that.
So I haven't prepared much. I'm Gillian McIntyre, and I live at 403 Reynolds Street.
403 Reynolds Street, okay.
So we received the
you are
notice
behind-
because it's,
yeah, okay.
it's behind us.
Yes.
So no, we would just rather that, the house comply to what should be the size of the house. We have had, previous housing developed in the neighborhood, and we didn't do anything about it. We just thought it would be fine, and we feel it's just, changing the nature of the neighborhood and not in a good way. So I haven't prepared a long speech, but just that is my objection. We would rather that it complied.
Very well, thank you for your submission. Mr. Jelnick will respond to your concerns, and we'll take the matter into committee following that. Thank you. Sorry, before you leave, Ms. I apologize. I'm a little out of sorts. Are there any questions or items of clarification of the, I'm sorry.
It's Gillian McIntyre.
Ms. McIntyre. At this time? No. Okay. I apologize for bringing you back.
That's all right.
Thank you. So, Mr. Jelnick, if you can just respond to the fact that there is a fear of overbuilding with respect to this property.
Yes, I will. With respect to my new neighbor, I understand her concerns. I'm one of the rare people who live in this town that was also born in this town. I'm not trying to change the architecture, the streetscape, the feel, the culture, or the elegance of our hometown. I actually believe the design we've sought is one that not only respects that, but perhaps even further promotes that. I also further recognize that this process is not a science. I recognize that we are asking for a variance. It's relatively minor. And I believe in balance, the end product will only add an appeal to what already exists within the neighborhood.
Very well. Thank you very much for your submission. Are there any further questions or items of Mr. Jelinek at this time? I see none. Okay. We're ready to take the matter into committee if you have nothing further to add.
No, I don't.
Okay, very well.
Thank you.
Who would like to start the discussion? Go ahead, Mr. Talowski. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm going to move this application be approved as applied for, finding that it does meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act. I'll note that there was objection from the neighbor, concerned that, or hoping that they could build to the requirements of the zoning bylaw, but the neighbor didn't specify any impacts that she felt would happen from this variance if it were granted. Madam Chair, in looking at the application, I find this house to be incredibly sympathetic to the character of the neighborhood, and that the majority of the variance here is being driven by the porches and not the actual size of the building. Through the various applications we see in this neighborhood, many of them have coverage of this magnitude, 23-25% of the actual building structure itself. So, Madam Chair, I don't see any impact being caused by this variance, in that the actual structure, when you take the porches off, is very minor in my opinion. So with that, Madam Chair, I would again recommend approval, subject to the 2 conditions: that development proceed in general accordance with the site plan and elevations dated January 4th, 2020, and that building permit issue within 2 years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Talowski, for this. I'm sorry. Are there any comments or discussion on this? Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just like to echo my colleagues' comments. We've seen a number of variances within this general vicinity over the time that I've been on the committee, and the staff commentary with respect to the number of properties and homes that exist that exceed the coverage requirements is a longstanding and piece of knowledge that we have, and as my colleague stated, the design of this building is sensitive to minimize the impacts of that. So based on that, I will be supporting the motions that's on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle, for that commentary. Anything? Okay. If there's no further discussion, we can take the matter into a vote. The recommendation that that the application be approved with the set conditions. All those in support? Okay. The application has been approved. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is application CAV 016 of 2020 at 1260 Marlborough Court. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of committee, and staff. My name is Victor Labrèche, planner with the IBI Group, located at 410 Albert Street West, Waterloo, Ontario, N2L3V3. We're here in support of the staff recommendation report, which we've reviewed, and its conditions. Also, I would note that with the submission of the application, I provided a cover letter planning justification related to the variances that are requested. In addition, the subject property is currently within a site plan application circulation, second submission. Circulation comments have been received, very minor details required, and one of the conditions, of course, is related to final site plan approval, which we support. Also submitted with the application was overall traffic study as well as a parking study addendum completed by Paradigm Transportation Solutions, also in support of the variances that are being sought. So again, we're in support of the staff recommendation and here to answer any questions the committee may have.
Very well, thank you, Mr. LaBrush. I would like to canvass the audience, though, because I didn't get a chance when you got to the podium. Who is here for application CAV 016 of 2020 at 1260 Marlborough Court? Good evening, sir. Are you in opposition or in support? In opposition. You are in opposition. Okay, so you will be addressing the committee. Okay, very well. Mr. LaBrush, if you have nothing further to share with the committee, I'll invite the neighbor who's in opposition to address us, and then we'll have you back to answer his concerns, and then we'll take the matter into committee. Are there any questions of Mr. LaBrush before he leaves the podium at this time? I see none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, come on down, sir. So your name and address for the record, please.
It's Stuart Hamilton from 1250 Marlborough Court, Unit Number 9. I'm on the board from the Condo Corporation. It's HCC 73, and part of my job is to deal with parking issues. We have 53 units, I think it's 53 in our complex. We have approximately 20 visitor parking spots. We do have an issue with overflow parking from the buildings across the road. People not wanting to pay, and they come over and they park in our lot. So that happens on, in the fall, it was happening on at least once a week. So we are going out and we're putting notices on these people's car. So my concern is with additional building, additional parking, and lack of sufficient visitor parking for this development, that we're going to be further impacted. So.
Okay.
And was a parking utilization study completed?
Yes, we do have one, right?
Okay. Is that online then, or where can we?
It's online.
It's online?
It's
Okay.
Online.
It is.
With the drawings together. So when you scroll the drawings,
Okay.
the last day's traffic.
Okay. Yeah. So that's our concern, and you know, we see a lot of traffic. We get a lot of foot traffic through our facility to Sheridan and to other parts behind. So that's that will also be an issue.
Are there any questions of Mr. Hamilton at this time, or items of clarification? Sorry, I see none. If you have nothing further to add,
yep,
we will have Mr. LaBrush answer your concerns, and then we'll take the matter into committee. So, Mr. LaBrush, I assume you have heard these concerns before from neighbors, or has anyone come to the site planning to state their concerns?
Madam Chair, to date, no, we have not heard these concerns. There has not been any concern raised up until this point through the site plan control application procedure and the variance circulation. I would add that the sort of two steps of the parking justification completed by Paradigm was completed. An overall parking utilization traffic impact study that was submitted with the site plan, or with site plan application. During that study, the utilization of parking was monitored within the building at 260 Marlborough Court, which is 228 units, of which this new building will go on the same property, adding another 70 units. Within the existing building, there was observed a 0.48 parking occupancy of that existing building. So about half of the parking spaces were occupied to support the existing 228 units. That may be somewhat attributed to the fact that the building is predominantly occupied by seniors. The new building will be geared to a similar situation. In addition, I think it was Friday of last week, it was confirmed by Halton Region that there'd be 12 affordable units supported within this new 70-unit building. And that was confirmed again by Halton Region and the funding put in place for that. So we would expect that the parking utilization that we've observed through Paradigm at less than 0.5 per unit would essentially be the same. And marginally, that may increase, but certainly not past, I would say 0.8. Our parking allowance here will allow 1.1 spaces per unit overall. The recent Minto development building was supported by this committee and by staff at about 0.9 per unit. So again, we'd be 1.1, and seems to bear out well within the justification that's been provided as well as the observation of parking on the site that's been occupied.
Okay, thank you for the clarifications. Are there any questions of Mr. Labreche at this time? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you said you referred to 28 spaces, is that regular parking spaces or visitor? I wasn't sure what you were referring to.
Through Madam Chair to the committee, I think I referred to, there's existing 228 units on the site today in the 14-story building. This new building on site will add 70 units in a 6-story building. So overall, there'll be 298 units in total after the second building is completed on site.
So apparently sufficient parking, however, it doesn't account or mitigate those that may be parking coming, that may be sort of squatters' rights, and they may be going to Sheridan or parking there. So maybe the question for both parties is, how do you mitigate so that you have parking for your property and there's appropriate parking at 1250 Marlborough? And maybe that's a question more appropriate for the condo people there, because I don't have an indication of how you monitor and if those people's parking in your visitors are actually from the apartment building, or are they potentially headed to Sheridan because they can't get parking?
Through Madam Chair to the committee member, again, supported by Paradigm, they observed within the last year in the subject site a utilization of half the spaces for the units that are there. My observation being to the site several times that all of the surface is designated visitor parking, except for a few, maybe 8 spaces in the back, and that is typically less than half full. So I would be perplexed why somebody living in this building or a visitor coming to the building would park across the street in another site and risk being policed, ticketed, for example, when there is ample spaces available on the subject site. There may be that going on with the Sheridan students, maybe with the new Minto building. I know that they do actually have meters for their surface parking spaces and charge for that. It wouldn't be our clients' intent to do that at all. They may have more of a rigorous policing need to do for our clients' lands in the future, and for the neighbor across the street, maybe that's the issue for them.
Is to call onto the towing and just do towing rounds for anyone that's unmarked or for their stay for a period of time or something. I'm sure there's things that can mitigate.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions or items of clarification? You can't. Once that's the procedure. Actually, sir, the procedure is that you get to speak and we listen, and then the applicant responds, and then we take the matter into committee. That's why I asked you if you had anything further to add. Then we don't do the back and forth.
I could just clarify some issues, but that's fine then.
I mean, sure, I'll allow it this time. We don't have that many people in the audience, but it is not usually our
We have a,
Yeah.
we have a very diligent population that watch, and I get an email within 5 minutes when I see, or when somebody sees a car parked, if they're in the kitchen watching, and the people going over to the apartments, I get an email. So it is happening. I don't know which building they're going to. And my worries are that if the visitor parking is full at this new development, they don't want to pay, they're going to end up coming onto 1250 and using our spots.
And
So that's-
while we hear you, and we actually, I sympathize with the situation, it's just not the venue in which this can be solved.
Yep.
We are here just to look at the application, and there is an extensive study that supports the material that Mr. Laberge has come
Yep.
forward with today. So it's really up to us to look at
Okay.
this and look at it from the planning perspective and
Okay.
assess the variances that are before us. And
Okay.
I'm sure there's other venues that you can mitigate the issue with unwelcomed parking, that while we sympathize with, it's not really something that we can help you with at this point.
In the utilization study, are neighbors consulted?
I'm sorry, like, I can't go through the entire document with
Okay.
you. It is online. You're welcome to read it, and I'm sure Mr. Laberge will answer any questions once we have completed our proceedings. You're free to converse with him, and I'm sure he'll be very helpful in answering all your questions with that respect.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your submission. Okay, so we'll take this matter now into committee. Who is ready to move a motion if there are no further questions of Mr. Laberge at this time? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Murray.
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff's report, which I note is in support of the variance, having also taken into account the neighbors' comments from 1250 Marlborough from the condo corporation issue with respect to parking. I am satisfied that the minor variance application meets all four tests under the Planning Act, and I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the application, but with the following conditions. That the 6-story apartment building be built in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services, and that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? The application has been approved. Thank you, sir. Mr. Laberge, if I can just invite you to speak to the... Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I believe it's our last item on our agenda, correct? Yes. Okay, so the last item on our agenda for this evening is CAV 017 of 2020 at 86 Park Avenue. Okay. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Terry Martino, Gren Weiss Architect and Associates, 341 Kerr Street in Oakville, L6K 3B7, and we are the agents for the owner at
Thank you, Mr.
86
Martino.
Park Street.
Thank you, Mr. Martino. Who is here for application CAV 017 of 2020 at 86 Park Avenue? Good evening, sir. Are you here in opposition or in support? You're in opposition. Okay. So Mr. Martino will take us through his presentation, and then we'll invite you to address the committee. Go ahead, Mr. Martino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The application before you is for a proposed 2-story addition to the south of the existing structure. As you can see it highlighted there in gray.
Yep.
As well as a 1-story link structure, which is between the existing 2-story to the north. The application seeks 3 variances. One is to permit an uncovered platform, which is generally indicated here. This is a deck. This is a rather unique lot as it's a non-conforming use. The property line, as you can see, it goes well back to the west, goes around and actually divides these units here. So that variance is with respect to this deck and its 0 lot back at that point, right there. The second variance is to permit a maximum lot coverage of 22.12%. The dwelling having 2 stories, which we believe is minor in nature and consistent with other structures and residences in the neighborhood. The third variance is for the maximum total floor area private garage of 38 square meters, which is what is permitted, and we're seeking 53.45. I note staff is in support in their comments of the 3 variances, and specifically with the garage, speaks about the additional area being internal to the building. There's a staircase back here, and that's where the additional area is. I believe that the committee has 2 letters of support for the application in their file. Yes. With respect to an arborist report has been prepared for the property, and there is one rather large base tree here. It is present. It's a birch tree. And its recommendation, obviously it's in the middle of the proposed construction and will have to be removed. That's a picture of the tree there. And the arborist has correctly identified the tree has sort of lost its shape, its major kind of growth, and as well as a birch tree, it's actually a hazard tree. You can see portions of dead limbs which exist, which come down in the wind. And his recommendation is it's a hazard and should be removed. I would be happy to answer any questions the committee may have. That's the.
Thank you, Mr. Martino. Are there any questions or items of clarification of Mr. Martino at this time? Okay, I see none. We'll hear from the neighbor.
Thank you.
Good evening. Your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Matthew Keogh, 73 Raymore Place, Oakville. So the only objection, and possibly it's a clarification, is in respect to the west end of the property, and potentially the arborist report answers my question. There's 2 rotten trees at the very end of this kind of narrow strip of land which backs onto my property, and I believe they need to be taken down, preferably to be replaced with healthy trees. And I'm wondering if that's part of this process, because if there's an arborist report, maybe the condition of these trees has been noted and maybe they're going to be replaced.
I have a question for planning staff. Is this application subject to development engineering or no?
Yes, it would be going through development engineering site plan.
Okay, very well. So there is a process that will include the trees and landscaping and all these things that will address the matters that have been found through the arborist report. So, but Mr. Martino will comment on the trees that are coming down, and we'll give you that clarification as well.
Okay, great.
Are there anything further that you'd like clarification on before you sit down? Because once we give the chair to Mr. Martino, it doesn't come back.
No, the building looks nice.
Okay, very well. Thank you. We appreciate your submission.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, perhaps if I could address the comments from the neighbor at Raymore. The arborist has identified the 2 trees at the rear of this lot. I guess it would be the adjoining lot on Raymore. They're indicated as, I believe, tree number 6 and tree number 7, and those 2 are either almost dead or fully dead, and they are recommended for removal, and so that will be done as a matter of the appropriate process in a site alteration permit. Furthermore, it's my clients, I've consulted with them, intention not to replant anything. There is a fence along there, but as you can see, this tree, as indicated, has a very large canopy and is a black walnut, and pretty much nothing grows under it. And so at this time, there's no proposed replanting of the trees in the backyard.
Okay. So those two trees are coming down in addition to the tree that you showed in your presentation?
Yes, ma'am. It's recommended by the arborist report that they should come down as they are hazards, yes.
Okay, very well. So we have the answers to your questions. Are there any further questions? Okay, we're prepared to take the matter into committee if you're satisfied, Mr. Martino.
I am, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Who would like to move a motion? Mr. Hardcastle? Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having reviewed the submitted materials, including the written staff report, and heard the comments of the applicant and the adjacent property owner, I will put forward a motion of approval, finding that the requested variances conform to the tests of the Planning Act. And I would note that that the application is subject to two sections of the Act, both 45.2 and 45.1. The first being with respect to the extension of an existing non-conforming use, and then the additional variances to cover and deal with the new construction, which are subject to the four tests of the Act. Finding that the variances conform to those four tests of the Act, the building addition is a sensitive addition to this unique property and building, and that efforts are being undertaken to to remedy some of the issues with respect to tree removal and constraints, and that the site planning, the development engineering site plan process will afford opportunities to further consider tree removal and tree replacement outside of this process. So I'll put forward the motion of approval, subject to two conditions, those being that the addition be built in general accordance with the final approved heritage permit, and that the approval expires within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? The application has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Martino.
Thank you very much.
We have minutes from January the 14th to confirm. Who would like to confirm the minutes? Ms. Murray, thank you. And a motion to adjourn? Mr. Hardcastle, thank you. Motion to adjourn.